Say about that.
Hey, I like what radio.
Good night.
I like what.
Yes, I am. Good night. Yes, I am live on Corridor Transformation. Who is this? Who is this? Who is this?
That's what they got announcement if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead. Roll, right, okay, my UNC friend. Yes, let me hear. Yes, I'm live, I'm live, so go ahead. Yes. Tell me.
You kind of break it up, but I want to invite the public to a free medical expo we have on Saturday to the police station.
Okay.
All is invited, including you and your family also.
All right.
And I just want to send you WhatsApp information with it so you can promote it there and invite the public attention. That's what I'm saying.
No problem. Who again? What's the name of the group?
9 to 1 and to the fire station.
Okay. 9 to 1 to the Puna Fire Station.
Social Association Network, and also we collaborate with the
with the
9 to 1.
Okay, 9 to 1 on Saturday. All right. I'll certainly mention that.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. So it could be much more positive. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the night. Yes, indeed. Well, people, before you start, you get these calls as well. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Of course. Let's get back to the introductory music now, man. I was enjoying that. I mean, of course, woman power, woman liberation. Let's hear singing Sandra.
What I'm going to say to you here today is likely to be part of a wider text trying to write some of the history of this country. It involves my personal knowledge, and most importantly, one learns from your exposure. It registered in my cranium that you have to be alert. So therefore, what I'm going to read for you today on this text that I've prepared is called a case study of a project where government has questions to answer. The process for the construction of this highway from San Fernando to Point 14 was initiated by a previous PNM government. And I come specifically to the Manning administration of 2007 to 2010. The North-South Highway artery had reached Golconda by 2010. The next leg was now to be onwards from there to Point 14. The Point 14 highway exercise was initiated through the process of invitation of tender in early 2010. However, although tenders were received in April 2010, the contract was not awarded prior by the PNM, since the bids received were significantly higher than the in-house engineer's estimate. And that in-house engineer's estimate was for $3.6 billion. So in 2010, that was the target expenditure for that highway, $3.6 billion. On March 4th, 2011, the UNC government awarded a design-build contract to a Brazilian firm, Construtora OS SA, known as OS, for the lump sum of approximately $5.2 billion, or $1.6 billion more than the original engineer's estimate. Now don't get me wrong, the engineer's estimate was just that, an estimate. A few weeks after the UNC came into office and met this project on the table for consideration of an award of a contract for continuation of construction, an interested group of known high-level Brazilian executives of OS flew by Dassault private jet from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to Durban in South Africa in pursuit of the said contract. These executives then traveled by car to Johannesburg for the singular purpose of meeting a member of the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, a minister responsible for and involved in the decision on this project. This secret meeting between the UNC minister responsible for the project and the OS took place at the Michelangelo Towers in Johannesburg during the FIFA World Cup in South Africa. What was the point of this transatlantic secret meeting on the eve of an award of this now leader of the opposition has never once shown any interest in this allegation, nor has she ever made even a passing comment. This contract was governed by the FIDIC Yellow Book. One of the major benefits of utilizing FIDIC terms and conditions is that these terms and conditions are standard and internationally recognized. A party should only, with very good reason, amend the standard terms and conditions in that FIDIC Yellow Book. The former UNC government, upon initiating the contract, changed the standard and accepted advance payment from 10% to 20% of the contract sum. This upward amendment immediately resulted in OS receiving approximately 856 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars, as opposed to the 428 million that they were due under the FIDIC Yellow Book 10% arrangement. Another major issue at inception was that all payments made to OS for activities under the letter of intent, which totaled $236.4 million, should have been deducted from the advance payment. However, these sums were not deducted. Before the ground was scratched, the former government provided OS with over 1 billion Trinidad and Tobago taxpayer fund.
A pleasant good night to all and sundry. As I promised last night, we will do the conclusion of this statement made by Dr. Rowley. Of course, pregnant, saturated, exceptional, imbued with lies, innuendo, blatant untruth, merely to deceive. And of course, I take note that Dr. Carson Charles, whose integrity has never been questioned in this country, and of course he played a critical role in the NAR administration, an administration that we can clearly say holds the record for being the cleanest, being the least corrupt, if one has to use that term, in terms of accusations. Because Dr. Rowley's contribution to the corruption index in Trinidad and Tobago is the manufacture of lies, and more lies, and more lies. And so the figures or the statistics or the analysis, obviously in such circumstances, will be skewed simply because the PNM has been in office for the longest, and Rowley is now, of course, nearing the end of his second and last term, obviously. But the fact of the matter is that as Prime Minister and as government, you wield a lot of influence, and you have a large amount of sway with the traditional media in particular, and therefore can of course dominate and influence public opinion. And Dr. Rowley clearly understands this. I say so without fear of contradiction, because when he went to the parliament with those fake pieces of paper he called emails, and then prior to that he went to, of all people, with those concoctions that we knew are in fact and were in fact so 3 years afterwards by the then Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith, that said it was pieces of paper on which people simply inserted and copied and scribbled and brought it to the with it 6 months before he presented those fake and his theatrics associated with it. I don't think he is that good so that we could recommend him for a Hollywood award. But I want to say, however, that in the context of the unesoteric, in the context of those who were not observing or were not sufficiently prudent to observe his behavior, especially those who were neglecting what his predecessor and former boss and Prime Minister Patrick Manning was saying about him, because he, Patrick Manning, at the time had questions to answer as well, and therefore in such circumstances all Rowley had to do then was to, of course, in recrimination, meaning that reciprocal accusations that will, of course, would have worked as well in his favor, because nobody knew him, and he was, of course, projecting himself as a corruption buster at the time. Nobody knew him. He certainly turned out not to be a freshly mint political cent or a political coin. Certainly, because from his utterances you could see that while it might have been sometime after recognizing that there is a tremendous vacuum in the PNM leadership wise, and it came because a fellow like Manning could not have been leader of the PNM under normal circumstances. Let me repeat that. A fella like Manning could not have been leader of the PNM in normal circumstance. It was in an abnormal circumstance, a literal aberration at the time, that he was able, of course, to himself manipulate his way into the leadership of the PNM. I am talking about, of course, when the PNM was decimated 33-3, even its Prime Minister and leader, George Chambers, lost his seat. Veterans like Padmore, veterans like, of course, John Dollison, veterans like Carty, who, of course, became infamous for all a we thief statement. Don't forget that. We cannot forget Errol Mahabir, Kamaluddin Mohammed, all of them were swept aside by the tidal wave of that juggernaut called the NANR, the late A.N.R. Robinson, who not only became Prime Minister but also record-breaking, had another bite at the cherry at the highest level, as he was also, of course, one of the presidents in this country occupying the office of President of Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, indeed. But that does not take away, and we must continue to be focused that the likes of Manning could not have been head of the PNM, because the leadership, the substantive leadership, the recognized leadership, the established leadership went with the political wind as they were swept away by the, as I said, incoming and, of course, monolithic NAR led by Robinson. That is why. And so a fella like Rowley, clearly, Patrick Manning making the mistake to have him be the bully of the party and acquiring the should I say the appellation, the name, the pseudonym called Rottweiler. And Manning used him to effect, but he had his own agenda. Let's go straight, of course, to the lines. Pastor, good night. Welcome to the corridor. Pastor, good night. Welcome to the corridor.
A pleasant good night. A pleasant good night to you, Lennox Smith, and everybody else on the line.
Yes. That's a good night.
Right, Lennox.
Yes.
I'm going to Facebook there and see a question was asked. By chance, you know the opposition leader Safar show?
No, I am not aware of that, and I'm sure I'm in a position.
You've seen somebody asking it on Facebook here now, so I just said I'm going to call out private if you know about it now.
No, I am not aware, and I'm sure would have been one of the first persons to know. So I would have dismissed that as propaganda. I think what is happening here, frankly, is that what I think is happening here with all of these rumors that you will see intensifying as we go closer and closer to maybe a preemptive strike by Rowley, having regard, as I said, to his address at that function. You see him dressed in there at the back of me. Remember, I told you that at the end of it, you were sweating. And the statements that you were making certainly suggested that elections is being contemplated at minimum. So I will not be surprised with all of these rumors emanating, of course, from the bottomless pit almost of the PNM propaganda outfit. But we are prepared. We are prepared. That is why I'm here tonight. So we are prepared. Whether a stroke come, no stroke come, we are prepared as an opposition, and as the UNC must lead the charge And as we were in the jaws of talking about, and this may be of course fortuitous, because here it is. I was just talking about really succession planning, and this caller of course called in to find out if somebody had a stroke. So it may well be that we are onto something here in terms of serendipity and clearly divine intervention. I like to of course describe circumstances like these. So the likes of Manning, and worse yet the likes of Rowley, could not have been the leader or could not have made the grade in spite of its faults, in spite of its debilitations, in spite of its limitations, in spite of its inability to manage the affairs of the country under Eric William in the latter part of his turn at the crease, so to speak, or his tenure. And then of course clearly during the briefer period of Chambers, the likes of Rowley and Manning could not have led the PN, and it's for obvious reasons. And on the other side of the coin, however, what we have seen is a question of the battle of who is more manipulative in order to, of course, capture the leadership of the PNM, having regard to the fact, and they were careful not to interfere with the rank and file, the grassroots, their base for, of course, staying in government under, of course, a very complex web of gerrymandering perpetrated by, of course, elements that were and are sympathetic to the PNM and find themselves in these institutions and were able, of course, to sustain the electoral presence, for want of a better term, the electoral presence of the PNM in the political sphere, Tobago political sphere of the PNM was sustained, clearly we know now, because of the pernicious and undemocratic, and I would like to say criminal behavior by manipulating and individuals causing themselves to finding themselves in strategic positions, and as a consequence of which sustain and carry the PNM baton to, of course, ride them into government. But now that we know, we have to be fools to, of course, continue or allow them to continue to manipulate the system so that they get unmerited access to power, fame, fortune, and of course decisions that are inimical and dangerous and toxic and septic and a total cesspool of iniquities that we have seen, particularly over the last 8 years. I say to you that is because of that, what I consider to be seminal event, the 1986 elections, that we have Rowley as a prime minister today, and indeed Manning as a prime minister, both of whom became, as a result of becoming leaders of the PNM, hold the office of prime minister. And just in case you believe that it is haphazard talk, or it is ad hominem discourse and my personal opinion, then I will want to attend to and to, of course, engage your common sense. You see, in this government, and some people who are in the area or in the zone of refusal, of denial, They won't be able to see it, but you give them the opportunity to see because it would have been expressed, and that is my job tonight to express it. We coming, of course, to the conclusion of Rowley's presentation. We coming there. It's early days yet. We are still early in the live, so I want to make sure that everybody is there and they are locked on, both on Facebook and on YouTube. Yes, indeed. I omitted once again to put up the fact that we are there, but I am the kind of individual who prefer to test the waters and to project the quality and demonstrate the pudding, because the viability of the pudding, or put another way, the taste of the pudding, the gravitation to the pudding is in the taste. So all of what we have done, waters, and you in return testing, of course, the life that would come as a consequence of improvement, which you so heartily and graciously responded. And that is why, of course, we are able, of course, to spread our wings to YouTube. Of course, later down I will tell you where we have reached in terms of the other aspects of this effort to be an addendum to, of course, this expansion. We are going to treat with that one step at a time, and as some people say, and I like to quote, of course, Confucius, that Chinese philosopher who said, the longest journey begins with a single step. Let me repeat that. It was Confucius who said, the longest journey begins with a single step. So I am in no hurry, but if I am taking that step, it must be to the ultimate, like the standing on the ground, looking at the sky, and how would you get up there if you never try? Yes, indeed. And so you must try and fail than failing to try. And so I am that kind of existential individual who believes in the human spirit and the ability to carve and to adapt and adjust and to make certain that we can, as human beings, carve and determine our destiny. And this is good information and good lessons for young people in particular, who believe that they are born in poverty. Around them there is chaos, mayhem, gangsterism, crime, murders, gunshots, etc., and believe that they cannot pull themselves up and out of that quagmire, out of that mess that they have found themselves in, even though their parents might have been caught up in that particular socio-economic environment. And of course, psycho-cultural as well. But it's important. But let me get back to the question of whether or not at all, but by sheer chance of the PNM losing dramatically in the 1986 elections to the NAR. And so to the 3-3 was their portion. And so, without seeking a recount of the Manning seat of San Fernando East, he was given a lease on life, politically that is. And so he began the process of laying the foundation for the level of deviousness in politics we have ever seen prior to, in spite of the shortcomings of the PNM and that of Eric Williams and those who were part and parcel of his cabinet and his leadership, and existed, their raison d'etre, their reason for existence would have been to capture and stay in power in Trinidad and Tobago. No doubt about it. But the fact of the matter is that a new era was born, a new epoch in the history of Trinidad and Tobago politics, and that of the evolution of the PNM was derived when, of course, in 1986, the PNM was decimated to the tree. There's no doubt about it. And what we have seen today emerging from that experience, that exercise, is extremely troubling. Clear that what has happened from Manning time and of course to now, the PNM has evolved, has mutated into a criminal enterprise. You only have to look at the mega and yet questionable and enigmatic monolithic structure that is being constructed on Balize grounds by Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley and his leadership, and as a Prime Minister of the country for the past 8 years. That's all you have to do, and you will understand the level of deterioration, the level of loss of moral and ethical and principle grounds that have been lost in a disposition, arrogance and contempt for the people, poor policy decision making, and of course an air of a total and absolute belief that somehow Trinidad and Tobago belong to them and that the rest of us could go to hell because they are above the law and the rule of law does not apply to them, and that the separation of power, that fundamental principle of our democracy and from which and on which our democracy functions, does not apply to them, as they breach those fundamental principles, and including of course abuse of the legislature, which is the third pillar of the separation of powers, as he would go to the parliament seemingly oblivious to the role and responsibility of the government to hold the society together and to generate policies and programs that is as far as possible equitable, and of course doing right to all, and to make sure that the government exists to serve the people rather than the people serve the government. And Rowley and they have breached all of those fundamental principles that now the people must now coalesce and must now retrieve that fundamental, because at the end of the day, whether they like it or not, as was shown in Tobago, the index finger, one man, one vote. And once we are satisfied that we have been hoodwinked, shortchanged, deceived, undermined, and emaciated in more ways than one, we have a duty and responsibility to show them not just the back door, pull out the front door to the side door, and get them out as expeditiously as possible from holding the reins of power in this country. And therefore, elections must be the ultimate solution. And I have no qualms. There could only be one alternative: the UNC and Kamla Prasad Bisesa as the leader of this country. It's simply because, and that is my perspective, others may have different perspective, but I'm sure they will come to the similar conclusion that it is the UNC in this country. But my assessment, my analysis, my evaluation of the situation, and to draw that common inevitable conclusion, is that between 2010 and 2015, she performed marvelously. She performed with a superlative. The Rowley administration can't even dream to scratch the beginnings of that superiority, that superior performance between 2010 and 2015, because the circumstances were almost the same, with a few, of course, nuances, a few variables, but by and large, the circumstances was the same. Rowley cannot say that he inherited a government that the economy was, in terms of the income, was tottering. Well, Kamala Persad-Bissessar by 2014 had a similar situation, and she took corrective measures, and we will compare the corrective measures that she took as compared to what Rowley would have taken, but more significantly as well, that she was able, of course, to leave Trinidad and Tobago in a very good situation in spite of being faced with a 50% reduction on the reliance of oil, gas, and petrochemical as the major economic activity, the commanding heights of the economy that would have been producing or gaining or gathering or attracting 80% of the foreign exchange on which we depend like blood for our existence, and maintaining the quality of life and standard of living that has manifested itself over the years. And I say, in those circumstances, Kamala Persad-Bissessar would have engaged in continued, not just people-centered policies, but conscious that government is a continuum. And even though Rowley and they were competing for the space that she occupied, she did not put her hand on the valve to open it, and so engage in profligacy as this government has been doing, but in a way that they claim that they are seeking the public's interest. What is that? When they go and make priority to what? To renovate the Magnificent Seven, buy Casabon painting, invest in a highway to nowhere for $400 million that we don't need, that you take 240, I believe, or 20 massive communications, when of course TSTT could do without that, because it is no use to us even to today, even though they have acquired it. A decision to spend, and they are so naive and so puerile and so simpletonic, simpletons, that when of course the information was disclosed to the public by David Lee, the chief whip in the parliament for the opposition, that the Train 1 Atlantic LNG, an investment was being made to maintain it, even though in circumstances where the upstreamers, Shell and of course BP, etc., and other, Bulletin and all of them, said that there are no direct gas there at all from what they get in the fields, because it is simply uneconomical. Rowley came on public, in the public face, and tell us that it was an investment into the future, because he has a crystal ball, because that is what I interpret that to be. He has a crystal ball, and luck will make him, or will cause Atlantic Train 1 LNG to resurface, to resuscitate, and so bring a return to Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I want to say up to now that has not been so. As so many other predictions that Rowley would have, of course, claimed that he has and has taken command of and has taken, of course, ownership of, and all of which have failed. Remember when Sandals came, he said that I want people to stop the crime because, of course, we are diversifying, and of course the best way to diversify is, of course, into what? Yes, into tourism. And if we are going into that area, our foray into that area, we must get a hold on crime and criminality. Is superficially and by way of memorandum, acts of Tobago that would have been considered to be exclusive and the people identify with and find it should be exclusive to them and not exclusive to any commercial venture that will cordon them off or take away their beachfront or the beach that they have been accustomed enjoying from time immemorial, including, I'm sure, Rowley when he was a little boy. You want to give Sandals that no man's land I'm talking about here, people. No man's land. Well, he wanted to do that. And of course, on the other hand, you had, of course, the two other ministers, Stuart Young, the, of course, sidekick of Rowley, and of course, the ever, what I consider to be Minister of Finance, when they were claiming that with the Sandals coming into Trinidad and Tobago's economic space and making its diverse contribution, whether at the construction stage or in the operational stage, they anticipate $500 million TT, of course, to the Trinidad and Tobago coffers. Not a damn cent. You know what kind of optimism that is? If you are invading the mind of an individual project or position that you may have introduced to them, I like to make the comparison. I like to make the figurative comparison or the analogy equal to, of course, looking to reach for the blue sky, but the expectation and the encouragement and the motivation is so high that you can't reach the earth at all. You can't come back down. Gravity will not allow that. You would stay at the level of the clouds. That was the optimism that Rowley, Imbert, and Stuart Young projected to the population as far as Sandals is concerned. And then, of course, in spite of all of that, it turned out to be nothing. And mind you, they are so despicable that they have left it for you and I to talk about it, to regurgitate it, to remind them, as they try, of course, to obfuscate, and as what transpired 2 or 3 weeks ago in, of course, Point 14, when Rowley tried to rewrite, as the revisionists will do, but always to their own convenience, the history of the OAS presence in Trinidad and Tobago, and where it was connected to the PNM. When the OAS was connected to the PNM, they, of course, butter it up. They saw it as development for Trinidad and Tobago. But when the UNC in effect began the project, and they have a right to claim it because they began it, under their stewardship, the highway to Point 14 was begun, and there is no historical differentiation or dispute on that. It's only Rowley and them claiming it. I have heard the most spectacular, the most stupendous, and the most asinine specimen of an expression of illusionary claim by Sinanan, and he had the audacity and the temerity at an inauguration exercise for all of Trinidad and Tobago, at the end of his speech, he is so buffoonic that he then says, great is the PNM. At a function that bipartisan, tripartisan, all of Trinidad and Tobago, all hues, all religious, all professional, all societal and persons of different levels in the society ought to have attended and would have been looking on. And to say that, I think it was despicable. It reminds me of Eric Williams when he used to go into the parliament. He and his ministers and his parliamentary colleagues and representatives with a black tie with a balisé on it, ambush advertisement. And I've always said and often said that as one grew up in Laventille, I always thought up to around the age of 15 that PNM and government was one and the same. You know what I say? I thought that PNM and government was one and the same. It's only one when I got conscious and I began, of course, to research and do my own information gathering. Then I was set free. And you must know as well that there is nothing sacrosanct about the PNM, nothing sacred about them, the party, etc., but a bunch of opportunistic political parasites who have coalesced into an organization, now clearly a criminal enterprise, to, of course, only gain government at any means necessary. And we have seen that over time, and in particular over the last 8 years. Yeah. Have been or make the grade of being leader of the PNM if it was not for the decimation electorally of the PNM in the 1986 elections. In other words, the likes, like if they had won their seats, Kamaluddin, Errol Mahabir, Padmore, of course, John Donaldson, etc. Both Manning and waste of time, Rowley would not have been in the picture at all. He would have still be, of course, hustling on at some university, practicing his volcanology. Yes, somewhere as a geologist, but and Tobago. And Rowley was, because he is the existential threat to Trinidad and Tobago, so we have to focus. He is, of course, pretending to be prime minister, questionable as it is. You see, it's worse in the sense that whilst Manning saw him as an asset and brought him into the political fray, after the 1986 elections, and Manning became, of course, leader of the PNM, and they had, of course, to be in the Senate, and he made him a senator. Manning made Rowley a senator, and he was, of course, Rowley the bulldozer, the bulwark of the party. Little known to most, Rowley was a NJAC, and he would say that conveniently when, of course, not in a PNM audience. You see, because when he's in a PNM audience, he is more PNM than them PNM. So, but when he's in a different audience, he will tell you that he was an NJAC. His introduction to politics was on an NJAC platform. And your common sense will tell you that he is not a true member. Captain, examine the horn. Examine the horns. Wolf in sheep clothing. If you could consider the PNM to be a sheep. But certainly since it's sheep clothing, it means that too is inanimate. So no problem. We could give ourselves some level of license or liberty, so to say. But the fact of the matter is that he was diametrically opposed ideologically, and as far as government and governance is concerned, Rowley, as a member of NJAC, as he has professed, and don't get me vexed before I bring the information for you. You people like to believe in the impossible. The impossible meaning that hoping that this thing is not true. That's the impossible. But the fact is that Rowley was diametrically opposed to Eric Williams when in 1970, when the NJAC movement was being, of course, not part of that, and therefore was opposed to the PNM in more ways than one, ideologically, and of course the rolling out of policies and programs. And as a result of the Black Power movement in 1970, we saw for the first time black people were able, of course, to work in banks, etc., as, of course, the elitist and Caucasian agenda of the PNM was exposed and loosened and shaken to the core. So they had to compromise. And so for the first, economy and opportunities were opened up wider for the darker skinned people in the country up to today. But the fact of the matter is that Rowley cannot genuinely say that he is a PNM. If you're born in Laventille like me, you could make that claim without fear of contradiction. But he actually gravitated to NJAC. But he will go all over the place and talk about that only because he's in charge. And to quickly, of course, wrap up that, so we go to, of course, to the presentation of the Rowley at that function down in Point Fortin, the opening of the leg of the highway to Point Fortin, between Point Fortin and San Fernando. Let me say quickly that Manning didn't stand a chance with this fella and his ego and his irascibility and his bulldog or Rottweiler or a pit bull, ferocious pit bull style. Of course, the pit bull on the ground report is not as ferocious as Rowley is and as ambitious as Rowley has demonstrated. But he was prepared, of course, to undermine and to wait his turn and like a cobra strike when, of course, time is right. Well, that is Rowley. But at the same time, I want to say that no way he could have qualified and still not qualified in two fundamental ways. One, he was a member of NJAC and therefore diametrically opposed to the philosophy, principles, and of course ideology of the PNM. Since, of course, Eric Williams was alive at the time and he was part of an organization that opposed Eric Williams, even though they generated, of course, the transformation that today our citizens are benefiting from in terms of greater democracy and greater, of course, opening up of the economy and opportunities. But the other fundamental area that he was unqualified in is that his very personality and nature, his rambunctious and evil tendency, never prepared him to be a prime minister, but was prepared to engage in opportunism and undermining and circumventing and betrayal in order to get there. Of course, you notice I mentioned lie yet. I mentioned lie yet because lie is a entity by itself. It encompasses and engulfs all of the others. That is how dangerous this man is. The existential threat to Trinidad and Tobago today. So that being as it may, people, I thought it was important, of course, to mention that, of course, don't forget, of course, this is the Corridor Transformation. Your host, Lennox Smith, and of course, this morning we had a wonderful time on the ground report. I must report that as well. But as promised, let's go straight, of course, to Dr. Rowley on the podium. We will pick up from where he left off last night, inexorably, to complete his address. Because from time to time, we will, of course, interject in order to explain and to, of course, make references. Because it is important that we have a comprehensive idea as to what transpired. And, of course, as I said, Carson Charles was in the parliament today. He was made a temporary senator in order, of course, to explain the situation, which, of course, we will play tomorrow to, of course, back up what we were saying before. And the fact that Rowley sweating in that presentation demonstrates that he has difficulty listening to himself. And, of course, conscious that the people in the audience don't have time with him, but are only there because 30 pieces of silver, 30 pieces of silver, 30 pieces of silver will get a man who is unconscious and who is, of course, reckless and who is opportunistic. That will make him sit and listen to the hogwash that Rowley would be talking. A total mendacious individual and only engage in prevarications that has no basis in reality. Let's hear Dr. Rowley as we continue, and we will make the interjections as we see fit.
We spent 200 million left, but only 49% of the work was done. And that will explain what Mr. George told you.
Let's hear again. He was talking about the percentage of work completed by the OAS by the time he came into office. I'm sure today you would hear from Carson Charles that by the time the UNC left office in 2015, and this is speak uncanny, uncivil, irascible, reckless and brutal, a son of an inhumane disposition. They were owing, and for 6 months Rowley never paid a cent. How much? 53 million US dollars. That's what they were owing. And he will not talk to them. He didn't, and I could prove it. He did not talk to them. He don't want to talk with them. Why? Because on the campaign trail, the way how he lambasted and the way how he the kind of vitriolic statements, the kind of excoriating utterances, it's just as how he will not sit in the same room with who? With Gary Griffith, because of what he have said about the man. And it's only because he was forced to do so, he sat in the same room with who? With at minimum, the leader of the PDP, a former head of the PSA, and to a lesser extent, the current Chief Secretary, Farley. But he really ain't one, because he believes he is superior to them. You see where he went to Canada and where he went to the UN, and so he believes it's there he should be, forgetting that it's Manning who initiated him. And then, of course, his exploitative, undermining and deceptive nature began to blossom and to take over and overwhelm, because no one would expect that a big man like that, a doctor and a university graduate, that devious. Well, while Hitler did not go to any big university, but he was equally devious. So too was Saddam Hussein. So too was Gaddafi. Was, of course, and well known in Africa, are talking about Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe and all dictators, including, of course, Maduro next door. He seemed to have a propensity to follow that kind of behavior, that kind of individual, to manipulate the masses for his personal aggrandizement and project himself as the knower of all and the purveyor of bad news couched in old talk, lyrics, propaganda, while of course the people suffer.
Told the Prime Minister the local contractors could do the job. Break it up into parts and hire 2 or 3 or 4 local contractors unless the Prime Minister refused that advice.
He was talking, of course, about Kamala Prasad Bissassa refusing the advice of the consultative, those contractor consultative organization. But as I asked the question, if OS had met the 3 billion marker that the Manning administration had outlined to do that project, I bet you Rowley can't answer if OS alone would do the work. Because the arrangement clearly is in practice that other contractors will be subcontracted, and that is what transpired in reality, and that is what I expected would be under Manning as well. But he lies so much that he came there intentionally to lie, and of course, like the ostrich, bury his head in the sand and leave his backside exposed to, of course, be licked up and put in such a quagmire. Cancer. Would OS have gotten the total contract, Dr. Rowley, if they had come up at the 3 billion threshold that the PNM, Manning and yourself had outlined for that project? That's all. But you see it as an opportunity now. You love the local contractors, the same contractors that when they came into office, you say they were engaged in a cartel under the UNC and had them in court, even a crit of an unlimited degree. Can't fool anybody, Rowley. You ain't talking to the audience and you ain't talking to us. And you can't even convince yourself, you're sweating.
And the whole kit and caboodle was handed as one back to OAS in July of that year. If you borrow IDB money, if you borrow EU money or anything like that, there are procurement procedures to be followed which involve serious transparency, and you have an oversight where they see where the money is going.
Yeah, right, Rowley. But you prefer to borrow Chinese money than World Bank money. You prefer to borrow Chinese money for the same reason you are arguing against. A pleasant good night. Welcome to the corridor. Of course, our external contributor has arrived. A pleasant good night.
So dear, are you hearing me?
Loud and clear, my dear. Loud and clear.
Lennox?
Yes, loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Right.
Yes,
I
indeed.
just wanted to be sure.
Yes.
What I want to say tonight, Lennox.
Yes.
What I want to say tonight, right before I make my contribution to these weak spine, yellow belly PNMites.
Well done. Well done.
Right? I want to. This was written by Susan Mills in 2017. We grumble about our rotten society and the waywardness of our youth, but we are ready to defend allusions to genitalias on the platform and elsewhere, or brush them aside as inconsequential. How can we hope for a better tomorrow if we permit a slow rot to set in today? Tonight I want to say, not only is Dr. Rowley a weak spine man with low testosterone levels, and so are his male supporters. Right, Lennox?
Go ahead, I'm hearing you attentively.
They don't like or they cannot handle intelligent women. That from the time, the only way that they can handle an intelligent woman is, like Dr. Rowley, make reference to women's genitalia. Sorry for being graphic at that, Lennox.
That's all right.
The way I see it.
You're in the right place. Go ahead.
All they can do, they come here every night. They can't come and tell you what Rowley has done for the last 8 years, except the stinker Kamala. Right? They can only come and talk about women's genitalia. I am proud of mine. I'm sure Mrs. Fasabi Sessa is proud of it. Just like their mom and their wives and daughters are proud of what they have. But they feel that when they come with these nasty phrases every night, they are doing something to us. Yeah. But it just proves, Lennox, that they are nothing but, Sparrow once sang a song about bedwood dicks.
Yes.
But these are deadwood dicks.
Aye, aye, aye.
That is all they can come and talk about, women. Suffering from low testosterone level and no amount of Viagra working for them.
Or honey goat weed. Or honey goat weed.
I feel that working for them.
Or honey goat weed.
Yeah, the honey goat weed. Yes. But they still Lennox, they will have to put out money to buy the Viagra and the honey goat weed.
Yes, yes.
But the stinker Kamala and Miss Santa Cruz and the rest of women on the live, you understand? That's giving them a ride.
Yes.
That is how those weak men are.
That's right.
Nothing more than weak men. No. Yes. Lennox, to hear Rowley I heard you say something here tonight. That Rowley was NJAC, part of NJAC.
Yes.
And to hear that mocking pretender, that babbling pagan, ride the back of Eric Williams' spirit, you would swear he was born and bred in the BNM.
Yeah, that's the intention, that's the illusion.
He rode the back of Eric Williams in 2015, yeah, and coming back again to do it again. And to see that this man, I'm sure he was in that march with NJAC and them.
Yeah, he said.
1970, I'm positive.
He said so.
I don't want to come and say it's more PNM and the PNMI.
Yeah, boy.
Right. And he keeps spouting this nonsense, according to you, this effrontery about the OS. And he had his troops say back in the Senate talking about the OS. And just one went, and this one went, and that one went, and it blazed them today. But they forget when Rowley was entertaining Butch, and we will remind them every night. But here next piece of hypocrisy. In 2015, because of what was done by the government, the partnership government, he was making an apparent reference to the Broadwalk in Shagaramas. Until we get a new route to Shagaramas underway, listen, Rowley said the project was underway when the PNM emitted office in 2010. You could tell me why this man is lying so? There was a consultation on the project. The route had been looked at and a feasibility study was being worked on, and the instruction to the consultant was to proceed to prepare tender documents. He said the partnership government abandoned it and is now attempting to resurrect it. He said that many parents were paying to get their children into an area that belongs to citizens. But I want to ask a question here tonight, Lennox.
Mm-hmm.
The zoo is sitting on land belonging to the state. Don't we have to pay to go into the zoo?
Yes, we do.
So if that is a tourist attraction, why must it be free? Right. Now, if down here, the partnership government developed down there, right? To bring in domestic tourism. Why must it be free? Now, 11% of the lands down there were used for development. 9% by the PNM and 2% by the partnership. So when Rowley want to come and spew this gutter rat nonsense, facts are there.
That's right.
Facts are there. All the partnership government developers 2% of the land. And look at how they destroy that broadwalk. Okay, all they destroy the broadwalk now, right? The traffic is up, but it's a Rowley's a liar. Lennox, I don't know if you remember when it used to have these, I think it's food tag or something, so they used to call it.
Mm-hmm.
People building boats and flying off this thing down here.
Yes.
Lennox, since my children were small, we used to go down here in Coronage, right? And we would leave at 2 o'clock because we know the traffic coming out of there was atrocious. And I am talking about over 30-something years. So what crap Rowley talking about is because the partnership developed down there caused that traffic. And 8 years now they have been there and they have done nothing. Absolutely nothing. And he is the MP for that area. To ease up the traffic in that area. You see when Rowley talking, take it with the tiniest grain of salt you can find. Because only life comes out of that man mouth.
A truckload.
And let all the soft men now in the PNM, let them come after me now.
Very good, very good, very good.
Thanks a lot, Lennox.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Yeah, same to you, same to you. I mean, that was fantastic. I want to give her a round of applause. I think things in perspective and misogynic statements such as that of Dr. Rowley and his minions, you know, not to be outdone, fella like Hines and they, who are vitriolic and who are excoriating and who are insensitive to the feelings of others, having regard to the office that they hold, and therefore they must be a little more congenial, a little more salubrious, a little more concerning with respect, of course, to the feelings of people holding such high office. They turn out to be despicable, frankly, inhumanity. Yes, indeed. And of course, I take note of what you have said, external contributor, Ms. Santa Cruz, and I want to say as well that there was a solution that he said was a PNM solution when the UNC would have put it in their own manifesto, and that is a causeway from Port of Spain, hugging the shores, right down to, of course, Chagaramas, so that you do not have this cul-de-sac, but you have, of course, a second egression and ingression point to enter that part of the country, and for recreational and business and other purposes, including, of course, marine life. Let's go straight, of course, to the other call. A pleasant good night. Welcome to the corridor. Welcome to the corridor. Welcome to the corridor.
Good night, hello.
Good night. Good night to you.
Yes, good night, yeah,
Yes, loud and clear. Loud and clear.
and good night to everybody in the life.
Yes.
Here we're going on. What happened last night was really true, but here we're going on. Well, I come back from the last night, I usually put that post of how I looking for man. So I'm back in my house, but here we're going on. I was watching on PNM live this evening with Juju, whether it's called a bitch. I coach with Judas, and a man named Samaruka or something.
All right.
That life had the most supporters in it. Than your life or TC and every life, and all the people know the truth about this PNM. And the people telling us something, I don't know. And God's name, all has supporters, PNM supporters still. I asked them, I asked them to tell them, just name one thing, rolling for children to be good. Here one and tell me, take a while, you know, wasting his time. So I said, well, if you can name one thing, but you know, it's going to cost one thing.
Yes.
You can't name one thing for me, boy, or I'll be coming and talking. I And Juju and Namaruka, right, is all about race.
Yeah.
An African, an Indian.
That's what's going to happen. Yeah,
If I ask them, I said, wait, that's this is racist, right? This is not racist, right? And I have a supposed to go to the country, you know? Not to go to the country, you know? Lennox?
yes.
I could
Get.
Lennox?
Yeah.
Half of them in this life, half of them I am how water to wash the ass for the coming on life and praising the PNM. Okay, Lennox, good night and thanks.
Yeah, well, of course, there is a category of contributors on live called trolls. So when you see one person, they may have different, should I say, signatory or signatures. They may have 2 and 3, or they make their friend, or and they multiply themselves. They clone themselves. So I will not be perturbed if we have 100 persons here, 200 persons. I am comfortable that at the end of the day, there are much more than that. That is, of course, looking at what is happening, whether after the live, they may not be on the live itself. But when you have Movelang and you have the people who wanted to hear discord and bacchanal and support for something that is unsupportable, you have to feel sorry for them. So I am not perturbed about maybe conjured up. I'm not perturbed because I know that it cannot be genuine. My common sense will tell me that, because they are not talking anything interested enough to attract my attention or even yours. You are there because you just want a macole, let me put it that way. But of course, I will not even watch that. I will get the information through persons like yourself, because I already know on the ground what kind of people will, of course, be attracted to that kind of what I consider to be psychophonic, because they are sycophants, sycophonic mumbo jumbo. Sycophonic mumbo jumbo. You tell them what they want to hear, and they come on and they rah, and they, of course, they wallow in their own misery, because misery loves company. And then, of course, they go to sleep and they wait for the other occasion. So 30 pieces of silver. That's all you have to conclude. 30 pieces of silver. But let's go straight, of course, to Dr. Rowley, because I'm determined to finish at 10 o'clock tonight. We started on time, and of course, I have some very serious work to do after the program, and of course into tomorrow morning, because I have to make at least one delivery. I'm hoping to achieve tomorrow, and you will hear about it as soon as that delivery is made. If I didn't do it tomorrow, then of course for sure the other day, so that will be on Wednesday.
But if you don't want that to happen, you fund this juggernaut project out of the cash exchange. So money coming in, Ministry of Health, Education, as it comes in, you spend to the contractor with no oversight from any international agency. Those are the facts, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
As I said earlier, it was Imbert who said he preferred to borrow from the Chinese because there is no oversight, as opposed out of interest, than of course borrowing from the IMF, World Bank, and the very institutions that he talked about. I mean, this man really believes that people are stupid. He really believes that. But I know that your eyes are open, and that you will, of course, once the proof and the information is there to the contrary, because he simply doesn't make sense. I taking the money out of my own resources to pay, and you're telling me that there will be no oversight because it's my money. Well, in the case of the government, it's not the government money. A number of red tape has to be overcome before that money gets there. People have to approve, people have to sign, etc., before OS get a check. I mean, this man is just hilarious, and at the same time stupid, and at the same time mad. A pleasant good night. Welcome to the corridor.
A pleasant good night, Lennox.
Yes, good night.
In the call. That's why the callers are not hearing.
Oh, I see.
Anyway, I heard you talk about nobody from the joint consultative, the people who does construction and so.
Yes.
And the JCC.
JCC,
You're
yes.
not hearing anything from them concerning what probably say, right, you know why? Because that's PNM party group number one. Mikey Joseph was the one that got the contract to build the walkover by Silo, 10 million. And I think he was also he built the one by the waterfront. You remember when Warner sat down and was crying at the off report?
Yes.
He was the guy who worked at Onish and them getting. Where all of them now? Where all of them now let up?
They're gone silent.
All of them quiet.
They're gone silent, yes.
Not a word in English of none of them. Yes. Yeah, you know why? Because all of them get eaten up food from the PNM.
Yeah, to the piece of silver.
PNM party group
Yeah, they betray their betray their own kind for that. Yes.
I had to call him back to tell you that, Lennox.
Yes.
Yeah, all of them quiet now. But on the camera thing, all of them sitting on crying. They ain't getting work on that thing. How come you're not hearing? None of them say a word about all the work at Calco, which relates to Rohan Sinanan, Fidelis, Junior Sami. How you not hearing none of them? They're crying that all of them left in the work. You know why? Because all of them from the same party. All of them. Thanks a lot, Lennox.
Yes, indeed. But of course, seed of destruction, I can tell them that. So let them feel that Rowley and the PNF, the respect and I should say foreign exchange saturated project, are talking about what Rowley did to Roger. He, of course, aligned himself. They clinched and they went down to Shagaramas. And he dragged effigy of Kamala Prasad Bisesa, and afterwards Rowley tell him when he got into office, get away from me and don't threaten me. And to show him how dangerous he is as a leader, he closed down Petrotrin and eliminate a substantial income from union dues, and in essence cripple the OWTU, a once most powerful trade union in Trinidad and Tobago. That is what you have. But let them, one by one, they will feel the ultimate pain of that level of betrayal because of a man, now that he believes that he's a dictator in the office of Prime Minister, will ride roughshod over anyone and everyone who he believes threaten his pernicious status.
Method of funding, the largest contract ever awarded in this country, also ensured that there was to be no oversight in payment and procedure. When we came into office in September 2015, over $5 billion had already been spent, with only 49% of the construction being concluded by OAS. The contract was for $5.2 billion. They spent $5 billion. So they only had 200 million left. But only 49% of the work was done.
Let's play it again.
Was handed as one multi-billion-dollar contract to OAS in July of that year. If you borrow IDB money, if you borrow EU money or anything like that, there are procurement procedures to be followed which involve serious transparency, and you have an oversight where they see where the money is going. But if you don't want that to happen, you fund this juggernaut project out of the cash exchange. So money coming in, Ministry of Health, Education, as it comes in, you spend to the contractor with no oversight from any international agency. Those are the facts, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This method of funding, the largest contract ever awarded in this country, also ensured that there was to be no oversight in payment and procedure. When we came into office in September 2015, over $5 billion had already been spent, with only 49% of the construction being concluded by OAS.
Well, if that what Rowley has just said is so, it appears that Rowley was not sitting in the audience when the chairman of NIDCO said that certain aspects of the project was taken away from OAS and a corresponding amount of money was of course taken out as well, for some 4-point-something billion. They remain with how they could spend 5 billion. I don't talk. A pleasant good night.
Lennox, oh my God, I have to call him back. I have to call him back. Lennox is how this man is
boy.
The lies are swirling around in his mouth like a maggot, just waiting to fly out.
Yeah, they are suspect.
Lennox, if you get the Joint Select Committee report, you will see, where they said, if I'm not mistaken, Sherry Brooks said it, right? Because they were spouting that lie in Parliament about 5 billion spent and only a certain percentage was completed. 3.8 billion was spent and 69% was completed, Lennox.
That's right.
It is the only answer. And I saw today with Carson Charles was made a temporary senator.
Yes, to address that problem. To address that issue, yes.
And I think I didn't get to pick up his contribution if he contributed, but I understand he was made. I will let it go there now and out the line. You show that it's a lie because you see they know they're talking to they shut my brain sick of fans. Excuse my language, Lennox.
No problem. And the thing about it is,
3.8 billion was spent.
He can't convince himself right now. He can't convince himself, far less for the audience and you and I. The man is simply toxic. He's simply evil. He has that proclivity, yes. That's it.
And you know, if I'm not mistaken, you notice his attire in that video.
Yes.
Shirt look like some young boy.
Yeah. He feels a gangster. Gangster style. But them same gangsters have something waiting for him. They have something waiting for him. No fight.
Oh my God, this man.
I am aware. Yeah, boy. The man is despicable.
All right, Lennox.
Yes, indeed. Once again, people, if you heard the chairman speak on that matter, let me talk slowly. The chairman of NIDCO said that at a certain point in time, when it was realized that the OAS might have had some problems, the sitting government was approached by OAS, and about 26% of the works, the scope of works, was taken away out of the contract. With the corresponding monies associated with the execution of those works was taken out of the contract. That is what the chairman said. And the chairman went on to say, Dr. Rowley sitting in the audience, people. He went on to say that the contract ended up being 4-point-something billion minus the monies that was taken out for the scope of works that was no longer the responsibility of OAS. What more better English you want than that? Dr. Rowley still at that function, as if he came with a script and he can't deviate, and he reading like some buffoon. It said that the works that were taken out of the contract, the taxpayer had to find additional money for that, because the OAS was left with the original sum to complete or to pursue that part of the project that was left with them. And the chairman said something totally different. There was a piece of work that was taken out, and a corresponding piece of money was also deducted for that, and therefore they remain with 4. How Rowley get $5 billion? How we get it? How Rowley get $5 billion? How? Your common sense would know that this man is unworthy and was never capable of being prime minister in this country. The man is simply toxic, evil, wicked, and so incompetent that he looks for any and every opportunity to camouflage. If it was a person, to render incognito, almost invisible, the level of waste, profligacy, incompetence, and the wastage and abuse of our money as we have never seen before. Thus the chalking up of a debt to GDP ratio of over 90-something percent. Kamlande, in spite of what he said, he met 44% debt to GDP, willed or bequeathed to him or inherited by him from Kamla Prasad Bisesa and the UNC in 2015. Oh gosh, Rowley, why you so dangerous and evil? Stop provoking the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Stop it. Stop provoking the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Rowley. Let's continue.
The contract was for 5.2 billion. They spent 5 billion. So they only had 200 million left. But only 49% of the work was done.
And remember, when he is talking that, as I told you from the beginning, remember, cast your mind back to the email gate fiasco. This man can make a phantasmagorical story. And if you're in looking on, and if you're not conscious, you may be vulnerable to believe the hogwash that he is talking.
And that will explain what Mr. George told you, that the addendum that was mentioned, they sat down with the lucky contractor.
Listen to him now on that.
And excised from his contractual obligations certain aspects of the work. They turned overpasses into roundabouts, and interestingly enough, in a neighborhood where they represent the constituents, road into a 2-lane road. But having done that, they left the contractor with the full price that was contracted in July of 2010 for the entire works. OAS started to run into difficulties early in the contract's life in 2015. They defaulted on paying subcontractors and were late in paying workers. Their difficulties continued with worsening effect, and they subsequently demobilized in December 2015, with the site being almost completely abandoned. There were protests by workers for non-payment of salaries, lawsuits by third parties, and reposition of equipment. I know about this because the minister came to me as prime minister, and the workers were out there. It wasn't their fault. They worked.
He loved them now.
As prime minister, I led the cabinet.
He loved them
to
now.
pay again, because we had paid already through OAS, but we had to pay again to those workers so they could get recompense for the work they actually did. Let the record show that those people were paid by the caring PNM government.
A total political Kobo statement that will pick from carcass of rotting flesh, that opportunistic political parasite and predator, a rapist and a pedophile, a reckless and brutal man. That is all I see with that level of hogwash that he speaks and spoke. Let's go straight to the line. A pleasant good night. Welcome to the corridor. Welcome to the corridor. Good evening.
He just signed up the real once upon a
Yes, I agree with you.
This government is not caring government.
Yeah.
They take away all the funding for cerebral palsy. They take away all the funding for disabled people. They cut in water workers' throat. There are people on the bread line. There are people lying up down in South and they say 3% is the normal what they call it, boy? To workers now. Unemployment rate.
Unemployment rate, yeah, the 3%. Yes. But he doesn't.
Like them fall from the sky, you know?
Yeah.
Because if it's 3%, they full employment.
Yeah, the laugh is on him. The laugh is on them.
Everybody is only come out in October because I went to they'll be showing. He's talking. He was talking about foolishness and not that.
Mean and evil.
In that budget, it's all our fantasy for he. Yes, and he could never balance our budget just like how he can balance himself. Because all he's doing there is lying to the public. The country is serious trouble.
Yeah.
Serious trouble. And this PLM, they don't have a clue. And Dr. Rowley can pay what picture you want, he can pay more, Michelangelo or any other than
yeah, but he like Casabon. He like Casabon. He like Casabon. He like local Casabon. Casabon.
Yeah, well, Casabon, they don't go but you read a point yesterday where they had a commission inquiry into the highway or some kind of thing for $11 million.
Yeah.
And that one person was involved in a meeting in that. Well, not free for all. So now, Dr. Mugilal said he was a commission inquiry into the inquiry that they didn't have.
Yeah.
So this place, and yet Dr. Rowley said he was above the board. Above the board for this highway fiasco. Each time I will tell people believing this nonsense he talking about there, you know?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Just like 3 years after the false emails, just like the Privy Council had to tell him as it is that you're trying to take away people's right to vote, just as how he himself had to confess and say when Kamala Prasad Bisesa took a turn in the president tail to impeach her, he then said it was he. Just as how he took the decision to send away the Galicia and plunge Tobago's economy, a man who was born there, into total tatters and chaos. Just as how he made the decision to close down Petrotrin and plunge 65,000 persons, the southwestern peninsula, into a state of disconcertedness, poverty, and not only community but family disintegration. Family disintegration. That is what that man did because he wanted to save his own skin. And he today representing us on the international stage. We have a revenge agenda that we must pursue when the time comes, and it will. We don't want to mash up the place, no. We want to have a peaceful transition of government. Rowley and his entire cabinet must be held, tried and jailed laws dealing with transparency, accountability, good governance, and the breach of the Integrity in Public Life Act. Quite apart from the Larceny Act. Quite apart from that, quite apart from the anti-corruption. Yes, indeed. That is where we must go as a people, as a civilized society. We do not advocate vigilante justice, even though we are tempted. But we advocate, of course, adhering to the constitutionally guaranteed and prescribed response and the solution to get our ultimate revenge.
The international newsreels confirmed that OAS had filed for judicial reorganization in Brazil on the 31st of March 2015.
We will pause there. It appears that we have to continue tomorrow. I want to do some work tonight, so we'll have to pause there, but certainly getting very, very interesting. But I think before we need to disabuse a particular position. Notice he said two things or three things. One, that must be debunked. That they were paid $5 billion and 49% of the work was completed. That's one. And two, that was so in spite of the fact that OAS was made to do less work. And you will see later down where he stated that we had to find additional money to pay whosoever will be given that work that was deducted from the scope of work of OAS. This man is toxic. This man is evil. This man lacks comprehension. He was in the audience when the chairman of OAS, when the chairman of NIDCO, the government agency responsible for the conducting and superintending and supervising of that project, said something totally different. Listen.
As we look back, we know that during execution of the contract, the contractor became insolvent and allowed him to continue with the project. Negotiations were conducted against the backdrop where the contractor had prevailed upon NIDCO that despite his insolvency, he wished to remain operational on the project, subject to the implementation of some scope and commercial adjustments.
Listen carefully to the adjustments, but more importantly, listen to the monetary arrangements. Rowley just said that these people, when he took over, drew down over $5 billion of a $5.9 or more $5.2 billion contract TT. Listen to the chairman. And that works were taken out and additional money had to be spent. So in other words, you're spending money twice for the same thing, because OAS get it, and then you have to come back and find to do the same thing, because you pull out some of the works that OAS was supposed to do from the contract and giving them a darling deal. In other words, this man is despicable. This man is shut. This man should be.
Rise to Addendum 2.
Isn't it Addendum 2?
On September 4, 2015, it inter alia removed from the contractor's scope a 10.6 kilometer, which is 22.4% section of the 4-lane highway.
I noticed Rowley had the belly to refer to the chairman, because he spoke before Rowley, and he was referring. You heard him earlier, Rowley referring to the chairman. Look what the chairman said. That the chairman didn't say that at all. Listen to what the chairman said.
Highway from Pinal to Mondesir, and 1.25 kilometer, which is 25% of the 2-lane connector roads from La Brea to Southern Main Road. It also reduced the interchange at La Brea to a roundabout. The agreement was that the contractor will complete the reduced scope and
Right.
exit the project by May 28, 2016. The reduction in scope was done to facilitate the contractor's reduced ability to execute his original contractual works as a result of his insolvency. It was further agreed that before leaving, the contractor will procure the services of local subcontractors to construct the elements that were excised from his scope. The contractor will award works contract to the successful subcontractors procured through selective tendering, then novate to NIDCO. The
Novate to
net
pass it
deleterious
on.
effect of such an approach would be to would be the transference of the time, cost, and design risks from the contractor back to NIDCO, while the contractor was being relieved from his contractual responsibility. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
Say it again. Say it again.
Cost and design risks from the contractor back to NIDCO. The contractor was being relieved from his contractual responsibility. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
Again.
Back to NIDCO. While the contractor was being relieved from his contractual responsibility, the contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
Say it again.
Back to NIDCO. While the contractor was being relieved from his contractual responsibility, the contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
How this Rowley fella so dangerous, boy? Because he holds the position of Prime Minister, boy? He's so abusive of that particular office? Rowley, you should be charged for treason. This is an international fiasco. By OAS. Now no part of OAS scope of works. They take out a corresponding sum of money. Well, it could be, it ought to be about $1 billion because it's 5 point something billion was the original. He said from 5 point something to 4 point. Let's hear it again. Let's hear it again. Rowley told us that the people were paid the same amount of money, the 5 billion, and nothing was reduced. That's what Rowley tell us.
$1 billion to $4.9 billion. Back to NIDCO. While the contractor was being relieved from his contractual responsibility, the contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion. Contractual responsibility. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Listen to this.
additionally, they removed from OAS responsibility substantial sections of the highway with an intention to award construction of these unbuilt parts of this highway to other contractors at an additional cost to the taxpayer. At an additional cost to the taxpayer.
Lord.
At an additional cost to the taxpayer. Ladies and gentlemen, surprisingly, they still agreed to pay OS the full $5 billion for the reduced scope of works that remained with OS.
Addendum 2. On September 4, 2015, it inter alia removed from the contractor's scope a 10.6 kilometer, which is 22.4% section of the 4-lane highway from Pinal to Mondesir, and 1.25 kilometer, which is 25% of the 2-lane connector roads from La Brea to Southern Main Road. It also reduced the interchange at La Brea to a roundabout. That the contractor will complete the reduced scope by May 28, 2016. The reduction in scope was done to facilitate the contractor's reduced ability to execute contractual works as a result of his insolvency. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion. The contract sum was reduced from $5.2 billion to $4.9 billion.
People, I am amazed. So you understand why there is so much violence in the country. You understand why? Rowley and they are the epitome. They are cursed. They are totally evil.
I have nowhere to put my 7 children. Why go with 7 children on the road? Them people crazy, man.
As the police and the Housing Development Corporation pulled up in front of her home, Sabrina McLeod could not hold back her tears.
People are offering like 7,000, 25,000 on this spot. Oh, the problem is not money, boy. Oh, the problem is not no money. Oh, the problem is wickedness.
But McLeod's common-law husband, Raymond Mitchell, admitted that he owes a substantial sum.
I owe an agency a sum of $125,000 in arrears. And the company that I has worked for, the boss man now come to offer to pay the money, and they still say no. And give us no notice of much of a month. Yes, how much days from Tuesday to now? We still went in the office to see if we could sympathize with them and still no.
That is the level of violence that is excised, is imbued, is extracted from that level of satanic conduct in the highest executive offices in the country. Understand, none of us are safe until that toxicity is eliminated, neutralized, and preferably blue lights and silver bracelets, ultimately. But there is a more clearer analysis as to what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago today on the violent front, and why. Before we go, let's take a look at this.
Trinidad and Tobago have been in a state of decline for the past 8 years under the leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. The country has experienced a sharp rise in crime, a decline in the economy, and a deterioration of public services. One of the most pressing problems facing Trinidad and Tobago is crime. The country has one of the highest murder rates in the world, and violent crime is on the rise. In 2022, there were over 600 murders in Trinidad and Tobago, a 20% increase from the previous year. The economy has also been struggling under Rowley's leadership. The country's unemployment is at a record high. The government has been unable to create jobs, and many businesses have been forced to close. Public services have also deteriorated under Rowley's leadership. The education system is in shambles, and the healthcare system is on the brink of collapse. The government has cut funding for these essential services, and many people are struggling to get the care they need. As a result of these problems, many people in Trinidad and Tobago are now calling the country a failed state. A failed state is a country that is unable to provide basic services to its citizens, and that is plagued by violence and corruption. Trinidad and Tobago are certainly not a failed state in the strictest sense of the word, but it is clear that the country is in a state of decline. There are several factors that have contributed to Trinidad and Tobago's decline. One factor is the country's reliance on oil and gas exports. When oil prices were high, the country was able to generate a lot of revenue from these exports. However, when oil prices fell, the government's revenue declined, and it was forced to cut spending. This led to a decline in public services and an increase in crime. Another factor that has contributed to Trinidad and Tobago's decline is the country's political instability. The future of Trinidad and Tobago is uncertain. The country is facing several serious challenges, and it is unclear whether the government will be able to overcome them. If the government is unable to address these challenges, Trinidad and Tobago could become a failed state in the true sense of the word. To avoid this outcome, the government needs to take urgent action to address the country's problems. The government needs to invest in public services, create jobs, and reduce crime. The government also needs to address the country's political instability. If the government can take these steps, it will be possible to reverse Trinidad and Tobago's decline and to build a brighter future for the country.
Yes, indeed, people. So true, so true. We have come to the end, of course, of tonight's exercise, but of course, I think it is appropriate to say one final thing in song.
Rowley must go. Rowley must go. This is massive outside. Quick and white. Why do? What do? Why do? What do? Rowley. You walk up to me, boy. You walk it up. 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 Rowley. You walk up to me, boy. You walk it up. 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 You walk it up.
Well, people, of course, we have come to the end, and as everybody would agree, Rowley has forked up Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, as one veteran politician, and of course, I would consider to be an uncle, a father, a grandfather, if you want to call him that, but a very, what I consider to be a sagacious individual. I talk about Jack Warner when he said, of course, in all certain terms, Trinidad belongs to Kamala Prasad Bisesa, and of course Tobago belongs to the Chief Secretary Fali. And since this is Trinidad and the Tobago, well, Rowley will be held with the and, but somewhere, of course, in the middle of the Bocas. See you tomorrow night, and of course have a wonderful rest of the night. And don't forget, of course, tomorrow morning the ground report, Andy, Mikey, and myself. I have not found a mechanism to, of course, note or take note of some of you online. I'm seeing, of course, Juliet Trotman. I'm seeing, of course, Uncle Breeze. I'm seeing, of course, one or two other persons, but that is on YouTube. I want to, of course, be able to glean from both, but since we are on both YouTube and Facebook. But that being as it may, people, it's just a matter of time. As I said earlier, it was Confucius who said the longest distance begins with what? A single step. If you have learned nothing tonight, at least take that on board as part and parcel of your edification, or part and parcel of your ability to interact with others when circumstances like these occur. Have a wonderful rest of the night. God bless. And of course, let us hear how Rowley fork up Trinidad and Tobago.